Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Ben Okri's play The Outsider, which is an adaptation of Albert Camus' L'étranger, also called The Stranger. I did a video about the translation that's called The Stranger, but there's an earlier English translation that is called The Outsider. I have mixed feelings about this play, and I feel like in some ways this is an unfair introduction for me to Okri, because I think he's a much better writer than the material he had to work with here. And I say that because this is Albert Camus' The Stranger. The Stranger, like 1984, like Orwell's 1984, to me is not a thing. It's not a text that lends itself to a visual medium like theater or film. I think the 1984 movie starring John Hurt was terrible. I don't think it's a good movie. And it would be an okay movie if it weren't claiming to be 1984. The problem with a thing like 1984 or The Stranger is that so much of it happens in the protagonist's head. It is their reactions, it is their perspectives, the way that they look at the world. And that just does not lend itself to being portrayed visually on a stage or a screen. And so a lot of this edition, a lot of this stage version just ends up being Meursault talking to the audience, just basically reading passages from the novel aloud. And yes, there's interactions. There's some pieces where, like, Meursault interacts with Marie or Raymond and Maison and his wife and whoever it is. But especially the latter portion, following the murder of the Arab, so much of this play is just Meursault telling us how he feels about things, how he's experiencing things, and it just, to me, does not really lend itself to drama. It's not something that, to me, works as a play. It reads well, partially because Camus is such a good writer, and I think Okri has done an admirable job trying to adapt to this, to the stage. Just, again, to me, it's material that does not work in being staged. That being said, I do want to give Okri a lot of credit, because there are some things he does here that actually are very visually interesting. So I want to start actually from the very beginning, Act 1, Scene 1. We start with stage directions, a decent block of stage directions here. So it starts total blackout on stage. The curtains are drawn and we see in the darkness the solitary figure of a man seated toward the back of the stage. We cannot make him out. He sits very still for a long time. There must be complete silence on the stage as this man sits in the dark looking at us. His form must be unclear. Everything is enveloped in an equal darkness. Then the figure gets up and retreats further back into the darkness, so he can be seen less, but his form is still visible. In another corner of the stage, even more veiled in darkness, sits a little old lady. She sits in a dim light. We see her briefly when the man first speaks, and then she is gone. After about 1 minute of silence on stage, we hear the first sound. The man speaks. He speaks in a dry voice. It is plain, unaccented, almost dull, but not dull. It is a kind of monotone, a hypnotic, almost menacing monotone. It is a voice speaking to itself. It is not speaking or projecting in any way to the audience. The audience merely overhears. And then we get the famous first line of Camus' novel. Meursault says, "Mother," pause, "died," pause, "today," pause. Or was it pause? Yesterday. Long pause. I can't be certain. Pause. So, and this is one of the things that Okri does throughout. We get these continual pauses, almost between every bit of dialogue. We have pauses just continually. And so that really slows down the action. And what that's going to do is create the kind of tension, the kind of feeling of almost like walking through snow or mud or something like this. This sense that there is forward motion, but it's slower than it should be. Which I think is really, really fitting and really, really going to help create the mood and the atmosphere of Camus' novel. The other thing that Okri does that I think is a really good innovation, because one of the big criticisms that a lot of people, post-colonial theorists especially, make of Camus' novel is that the indigenous Arab population of Algeria is more or less invisible in this novel. There are Arabs, but they function as antagonists without any real sense of humanity. Like they are props, basically. And Okri brings one Arab actually into this. He brings the woman that Raymond is having an affair with, who he violently abuses because he's terrible. So they do bring her in briefly, but there's actually an Arab that Okri has created who's not in Camus' novel. We get this in part 2. We get this in Act 3, Scene 5, when Meursault is in jail. So it says here, Meursault is brought to his cell. In his cell there is an Arab. As he is brought in, the Arab laughs. And this is actually, I find this interaction really fascinating. And I actually think it would have very much improved Camus' novel, but it's not there. The Arab prisoner says, "What are you in for?" Meursault says, "I killed an Arab." The Arab is silent. For a moment there's an air of menace. Then it darkens in the prison. Meursault sits in a corner alone with a rolled-up mat beside him. The Arab lies on his mat. Then he goes over to Meursault. Pause. The Arab prisoner says, If it were up to us, you wouldn't leave this prison alive." Meursault is silent. The Arab prisoner says, "Let me show you how to use your mat, or you'll never get any sleep." He shows Meursault how to fix the mat. You can roll up the Arab prisoner says, "You can roll up the end to make a pillow." So that's the whole scene. I think it's a really fascinating scene, actually. I think it's a great addition to the story that Camus has told us, because in this very subtle, very small, quick scene, it gives us the ambiguity of the relationship between the Algerians, the Arab Algerians, and the Pieds Noirs, which were the French Algerians. People like Camus himself, who were French but were born in Algeria, lived in Algeria, etc., etc. The other thing that Okri does that I think is really good, and this is something that you can do on stage that you can't do in fiction, the ghost of the Arab that Meursault kills, as well as the ghost of Meursault's mother, actually show up. So the first time this happens is at the end of Act 3, right before we go to Act 4. And this is the bit where Meursault, if you know the novel, this is the bit where Meursault realizes he's been talking to himself for months without being consciously aware of it. And the stage direction says here, In a corner of the cell, staring calmly at Meursault, is the Arab he had murdered. The mother shows up Mother shows up basically at the end, but the Arab shows up a couple of times during the trial, a couple of other times. But there's one weird bit here where I don't really understand it. And I like the idea, but I don't know that it does much for me. So this is during the trial. Meursault's lawyer is making his closing statement, and one of the things that Meursault notices that's weird about it is that the lawyer keeps using the first-person pronoun. I did this, rather than my client or the defendant or whoever it is did this. So Meursault is talking about the crime as though the lawyer had committed it. Or the lawyer is talking about the crime as though the lawyer had committed it rather than Meursault. And what we get here, we get this bit where it says, let's close this again. Dead Arab among the spectators, mute. And then Meursault makes a statement to the audience. Again, this is just him monologuing to the audience, going through the stuff from the novel. And then it says, dead Arab, mute. Meursault makes another statement to the audience, dead Arab, mute. I don't understand it, I guess. Because it's not written as a character entrance or exit. So, I don't know. I don't get it. If the dead Arab has become visible in the audience during this time, cool, okay. Why? Why right now, though? It's an interesting thing. I like the idea of it. And I think making the Arab more present is actually a really useful and important thing to do. I don't fully get why it's done in the way that it's done in this particular portion, but in the other portions where the Arab is in Meursault's cell, just sort of watching him, at the end where Meursault is sort of reconciled to his fate, and both the Arab and his mother are there. Perfect, great, I love it. But yeah, I think this is kind of a weird moment, and I'd like to see how it was staged, because I think it would make more sense if I saw it visually. But again, this is just not a novel. Camus' novel is not a book that lends itself to being staged, and so overall I think the whole thing is a huge dramatic challenge. And I think Okri does a good job with it, but I don't know that he quite overcomes just how not written to be visual this novel is.